Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. We're happy to have you back with us again today with Dr. Greg Miller, our host. And again today, Russ and Susie Smidt from the team here at Faithful and True have agreed to join us to continue the conversation that we started on the last podcast, where we were talking about being triggered while together in public with your spouse.
Yeah, and like Reddy said, we're just going to continue that conversation. And if you were with us for the last podcast, we just began kind of the conversation of what does it look like for a spouse to re-engage public spaces, knowing that it could be triggering for either one of them, and then how do we stay partners with our spouse versus becoming oppositional. So thanks for coming back and continuing the conversation, Russ and Susie.
It's great to be back.
Great to be here. Great to be here.
Well, as I mentioned in the last podcast, part of what we're going to be talking about is redeeming or reclaiming experiences or spaces that might have been tainted through the acting out itself. Maybe there was a restaurant that a couple had, and now because of the acting out, there's a negative association with that restaurant. Or maybe there's a place that the couple went for vacation, and now there's a negative association with that. And so we just want to talk about what does it look like for a couple to choose to move towards something that they know will be triggering and not be defined by the trigger, but actually try to redeem that space or experience. So, Susie, what if you just begin talking about from the wife's perspective, kind of what does it look like to reclaim something that's been lost?
Sure. I'd be happy to. There's a temptation, I think, to take that place and immediately hope to work on being able to go back there and enjoy it. And I would encourage our listeners to think of this as much more of a process. If I hear it once, I hear it all the time. This all takes too long, from our clients, and this process does take time. And one of the things that I think has to happen before a wife can think about, or a couple can think about reclaiming a location or a vacation or a place, is this process of grieving the loss of what they first and once thought was true. So this wife all of a sudden now has this new information that all of these times we've been at this restaurant or location, whatever, there have been these things that I haven't been aware of. And so the grieving process begins, and it involves anger. It involves maybe a period of shock, a period of denial, a period of arguing with it, and wrestling with that, and letting ourselves spend time having the feelings that I have related to the loss, so that I can eventually heal, and be able then to reclaim something. I don't know that it's so obvious. Okay, I'm finished grieving and now I reclaim. That's not what I'm trying to say.
Right.
But I think first and foremost, it's allowing me to be in wherever I'm at. And it's tempting to expend a lot of energy, waste a lot of energy trying to feel a way that I don't feel. Right. Or trying to push through, or trying to have something that really isn't where I'm at. And so that's the first thought I have, is this idea of feeling it so that I can get eventually to the next place.
Yeah. I think we talk about this idea of we move towards it, we move through it, we move beyond it. And if I'm not acknowledging it, if I'm not willing to move towards it, then I'm not going to be able to move beyond it.
Yeah.
It's interesting because what a lot of guys...
Go ahead, Russ.
Okay. I think we're alternating who goes first. We need to have some kind of signal. No, I was just saying a lot of people, because they don't want to recognize these things in themselves, or they have a lot of shoulds. If they start to feel unsafe, there's a tendency to say, well, I can handle this level of unsafety, or I can handle this level of anxiety. And then by not dealing with it at that lower level, then when it does hit a higher pitch, then things are more out of control. And so, we try and get people to say out loud what they're feeling more towards the beginning of that, and be comfortable saying, I'm starting to feel anxious now, and I just want you to be aware of that. I'm starting to feel unsafe, and I think I need to take a break, or I need something, and be able to identify that need. But I think that is kind of this should idea. I should be able to handle this, and there's really no should.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that we do here at Faithful and True when we are doing a full disclosure is we think it's important that the spouse share information with his wife about the locations, the places of the acting out, so that she has that information. And there may be those that don't think that that's helpful, but one of the things that we know is if, let's just say, I brought my affair partner to this particular restaurant and I choose not to tell my spouse without realizing it, I'm going to leak some of my shame, my anxiety, and my spouse is going to pick up on something, even if she doesn't know what it's about. So we feel like it's important that spouses have the information that they need so that they can make an informed decision about how they want to move forward, versus the husband determining that I'm not going to share this, and like you said, I'm going to take care of it by myself, which I think is unrealistic.
And that's one of the ways, then, isn't it, Greg, that a spouse is allowed to work on creating her own safety. Making a choice that, okay, then that is now not a place I would choose to go.
Right.
At least for a time, maybe not forever, but she gets to decide that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you kind of mentioned sometimes it can be a rush too quickly to try to reclaim spaces or redeem spaces. What can also be true is in the early days of the experience and right after the exposure and the information, the spouse can make a declaration that everything has been lost. I remember Beth telling me that everything has been tainted by this. There's nothing that hasn't been tainted. And what's true is that's where Beth was in the moment. And to be honest, I kind of felt the same thing. But in time, and you mentioned this, it just takes time. You begin to discern what can be redeemed and what can be reclaimed and what maybe wasn't tainted by the acting out. But that's not going to be known initially. And so even in the early days, to be open to there may be some things from our past that can be redeemed or reclaimed.
Yeah.
Not maybe another way to say it is not everything was a lie. And it makes perfect sense in the early days that spouses believe everything was a lie and everything has been tainted by what you've done.
Another way to say that is that a spouse's level of vulnerability goes way up to the ceiling shortly after a discovery of this acting out, that everything feels unsafe. And I feel incredibly unsafe. The vulnerability is high. And so there's a legitimate need to protect and be protected. Right. And that's going to be that's going to show in a lot of the choices that a wife makes. She's going to probably make more careful choices for a while and err on the side of, no, I don't choose to do that. The other thing I think is we learn as we go. I walk into this setting and it goes fine, or I walk in and it doesn't go fine, and I learn, oh no, that's not something I'm going to do for a while.
Right.
And there's probably a whole host of feelings about that. Maybe they're angry that this has been taken from them, but it doesn't have to mean that that's forever.
Right. And what also is true is spouses, in our case, the population that Faithful and True works with are men who have struggled with sexual addiction and have betrayed spouses and then their wives. And so in this particular context, the wife gets to determine what she is able to do, what she is willing to do. And there may be certain things that are just off the table for a while. And it's about naming your limits and being aware of your possibilities and your capacity, especially in the early days of recovery.
And I tell
I
women
think
that changes. That can change from day to day. An activity that is okay for me today or her today might not be another day. Go ahead, Russ.
Yeah, I was just thinking that one of the ways to increase safety around triggers is for the men to be very open about their recovery plan. For instance, if you know that part of your yellow, we talk about the yellow circle, things that are likely to lead you toward acting out. If you're able to share that with your wife and say, okay, these are the historical areas that I've had difficulty, and this is what I'm doing about it. And you might say for a time, for instance, I know I did, I didn't go to beaches, I didn't go to a pool, I didn't go to gatherings, places where I would, what we call trigger rich environments. And so for a time that felt safe to me. And because Susie knew that, then she could understand why I was choosing not to do that. So I think the more information you share like that, the better. Otherwise, the spouse is left with, okay, is this scenario unsafe or not? Is this scenario unsafe or not? And that's terrible for both of you. And it's also a reactive thing again. I mean, we in that victim place where you're watching your spouse gauging her reaction and trying to decide how safe you are based on how safe you think she is. And by not talking, both people, their anxiety goes through the roof. And so the more you can talk about it globally in terms of a plan, and then as you're going into places, talk about, your anxiety, the better off you're going to be. It involves a lot more sharing of emotion and feelings. It involves a lot more honesty and courage. And most of the time, guys and couples often aren't very good at that.
Right. Well, and one of the things to acknowledge is we've been talking about the spouse being triggered, but the husband can also be triggered. If let's say that the couple is going into a restaurant, we're using that example a lot, where a husband is taking an affair partner. Well, the spouse is going to get triggered in her anger, her grief, or sadness, and the husband can get triggered into his shame, his fear, his anxiety, his grief, his sadness. And it's important that in a safe way, they're able to be with each other in those triggers and acknowledge them to each other so that, again, they can be partners to the extent that in that moment they're able to be.
One of the
I
ways
think that's
that
a
I
good
think
point.
we partner in reclaiming these places is to talk about them in our couples counseling and to have intentional conversations about that. I think about the number of times we've talked through a potential family reunion or a cabin week or a vacation or going to a wedding. That's a big trigger one. And devising a plan for how we will take good care of ourselves, how we will communicate with each other, and then how we will react in the moment and make changes as we need to make them.
Well, so I want to go back to something that you mentioned. It's a great example, and that would be weddings. That what we see in most of the couples that we work with, and it was absolutely my experience with Beth and our experience as a couple, is especially in the early days, weddings are incredibly triggering. And so you're getting these invitations to the weddings, and as a wife determining, do I feel like this is something I can do? Who is the person? Maybe it's even, I can go to this wedding, but I can't go with my spouse right now. Maybe the wife determines I want to go, but I don't want to go with my husband. And the more options there are, the more you can engage something that you know is going to be difficult and triggering. But in time, weddings can be one of those things that as a couple continues to do their work, that can actually be redeemed and become a meaningful experience for them in their own relationship.
Yeah, I think you're talking about some transitions in there, like we are in all of this. I think when both people are triggered, both individuals are triggered, prior to discovery, you would often, if you get triggered with have a big emotional response, you get hurt, you go to your spouse to get that healed or get comfort. And if you're both triggered, then oftentimes your spouse isn't the one that's going to be able to provide what you need, and you need to reach out to your you're the people
Hmm.
on of your same sex, and that's not much fun initially. I can tell you that early on when I was leaving the reception two, three, four times to go talk myself down with some of my group, that's not much fun for Susie to get left behind. And so those, that was a both and thing where we were able to get through the wedding without, too much trouble, but it wasn't much fun.
Right.
Would you agree with that, Suze? That was a tough
Yeah,
transition.
yeah. I also wonder if people know what you mean by bus.
Uh, I just assume, if Greg's on the podcast, then the bus has been brought up.
There
You
is
think
truth,
about,
but you could go ahead and
yeah,
remind
yeah,
people.
yeah. Well, people that are in your support group, that's one of the biggest challenges for a lot of men is when they come into recovery, they don't really have any strong male friendships or relationships. And part of the addictive process is reducing shame, and the best way to reduce shame is to be honest and open and transparent with other addicts that understand you, so that when they tell you that you're what's true, you can actually believe it because they fully know you and they understand you. And so that's kind of that's your inner bus. That's like the front of your bus. And then
Hmm.
the rest of your bus could be other support people. It could be people in your church. It could be people whatever. But it's all that support group that you're surrounding yourself with, so that you're not trying to do this alone.
Yeah. Well, we would even say nobody can do the journey of recovery in a two-seater. If it's just
Yeah.
you and one other person, you're not going to make it. Even a minivan doesn't work. You're going to need a bus of people that can be with you on the journey and support you.
Yeah.
And, kind of what you've identified is the strategy of I'm at this experience. Let's go back to the wedding. I'm at a wedding. I'm getting triggered. I'm getting triggered into my shame. I'm getting triggered into my sadness. I'm getting triggered into my fear. And maybe we're not in a place where I can process that with my spouse, and it needs to be processed so that I can get recalibrated into my truth. And that's where reaching out to my community in real time becomes so important. And one of the
Yeah.
things that I think is important for us to say is it's okay and valid if there are certain places or experiences that aren't able to be redeemed. There just may be some things that we will never go back to that place again. We will never do this again. And it doesn't mean that anybody is failing. It's just an acknowledgement of our limitations. And something else that is true is if people are getting triggered into their emotions years into recovery, maybe they've been in recovery for years and they and their spouse goes to a wedding and they've done weddings before that have gone great, but this particular wedding is triggering. That's okay. That makes sense. You get to be where you are.
Yeah.
Is there
Yeah.
any
It's not a
specific
straight line.
is there any specific guidance or encouragement that you would give to a spouse, Susie, that is considering the possibility of moving back towards something that maybe has been off the table for a while because of the associations with that place or thing?
Yeah, for sure. I would say if I've deemed something worthy of reclaiming, right? I've decided, I've given it thought, I've decided, no, that isn't something that I want to avoid forever. Then I want a spouse to approach that process with great intentionality. I want her to bring it to her group or her counseling individually and talk about what are some of the things she personally needs in that process of reclaiming, as well as then coming together with her husband and probably talking about it in their couples session, and and devising a plan. We go into so many things without a plan, expecting them to go well.
Right.
And they just usually, often,
many times,
what word should we use?
Occasionally.
They frequently do not, because there hasn't been a plan, right? There hasn't been, certain things haven't been thought through. And so, the number of details that can be talked about and planned and expectations managed. I have my expectations, the spouse has his, and let's talk about those and decide what needs we both have in it, so that this plan can have a pretty good chance to succeed.
Well, in the last podcast, you talked about these 3 things that you're encouraging women to do as they navigate triggers. So how would remind us of what those 3 things are, and kind of maybe how they would play out when you're wanting to reclaim a space?
Sure. The first one is having the wife be fully aware that she has more power to create safety for herself than she ever probably embraced before. Mm-hmm. And so that is the choices that she has, in both in the moment and prior, as she makes the plan, her choices to do things that keep her in her window of tolerance, her window of well-being, that mm-hmm. idea that I'm not way above that tolerance level, agitated, jittery. I'm also not sinking below into hopelessness or a place of helplessness. Mm-hmm. But I know what keeps me well regulated. I can practical things like exercise, food, water, right. Sunshine, all kinds of things that I think we have more power to attend to these things than we first realize.
Well, and along those lines, even the idea of naming my limits. Maybe we create this great plan. Maybe let's use the wedding example again. We're driving to the wedding, and at some point, the wife realizes, I'm not ready for this. This is too much. Mm-hmm. And part mm-hmm. of the thing that is so important is that we get to name our limits, so the wife has the permission, the power to say, nope, I'm not ready. And
yep, I've changed my mind.
My encouragement for the husband would be to graciously hear that and to be empathetic, not to become critical or shaming of the spouse's naming her limits. The husband many times wants the spouse to be in what he would say a better place, but many times that's not about the wife. It's about the husband not wanting to be in his shame or fear anymore. So he's kind of pushing the wife to do more than maybe she's able to.
And that's point number 2 that I talked. Go ahead.
Yeah, this lag thing is really hard. No, I was just going to say that some of it is a way of approaching it and looking at it differently. So in other words, going into something like a wedding, you could approach it as success, as meaning we got through the whole wedding and we got home and it went well, versus saying success is we communicated well, we did as much as we could, we were strong enough to keep our limits. That's what success is, rather than viewing it as an end goal of achieving the event.
Right. Mm-hmm. Success was we were open to it. Success was we talked about it. And I love what you just said. And success is engaging our limits and naming what we're able to do and what we're not ready to do yet.
Well, Greg, can you think of a way that you can leave our listeners with a real sense of hope on this category?
Yeah, one of the things that is so powerful is I remember in the early days of recovery, one of the things that Beth said is everything has been tainted, everything has been lost. And one of the beautiful aspects of especially couples recovery is you began to realize not everything was lost, and there are things that can be reclaimed and redeemed and transformed. And that is the hope that we have, is that with intentionality, with focus, with grace, and with forgiveness, that there is a way to move forward. And one of the most affirming things is when a couple says, you know what, I never thought we were going to be able to do that again, and we did. That's I think where we get our hope.
And that's exactly why we had Russ and Susie with us today, because they are a great example of just how successful that can be. We thank you both for being with us again today on the podcast, Russ and Susie. We look forward to having you back on the Faithful and True podcast again soon. I'm sure that our listeners and our viewers have really benefited from these past two podcasts together. Again, as we have told you in the past, if you are a man that's struggling with sexual purity issues, we invite you to visit faithfulandtrue.com. Click on the workshops and visit the Men's Journey Workshop. There's lots of great information and opportunity for you there. We have also under resources, we have over 400 of these podcasts that you can listen to or in some cases view because of our YouTube channel. So until we join you again, we thank you for joining us, and we hope that the coming week is filled with many blessings and great vision.